Hello, everyone, and welcome to Mindbridge Edge 2023. My name is Joe Welch, and I am the Global Implementation Lead here at Mindbridge, and your host for today's session, AI for Internal Controls over Financial Reporting. We're now entering a time where organizations are turning to artificial intelligence and anomaly detection technology to improve the efficiency and effectiveness of internal controls over financial reporting. Some companies are using ensemble AI to risk score every financial transaction and gain insight into underlying business processes. Others are using machine learning techniques to detect typical and atypical patterns in their financial data. Data validation functionality is another appealing feature, as it allows organizations to rely on the completeness of data and build trust in the technology they are using. The initial challenge that organizations face, however, as they begin their AiCFR journey, is knowing where to start. To help us with that challenge, I'm delighted to introduce to you my co-host for this session, Chris Swanson of Polaris Inc., who themselves are currently embarking on such a journey with Mindbridge. Chris, thank you for joining. Would you be able to provide our audience with a brief background about yourself and what your current role with Polaris entails?
Yeah, no problem. Thanks a lot for having me, Joe. So I started my career off in public accounting, was in that for a few years, and I moved over to the industry side of things with a number of different internal audit and external reporting roles. My transition over into the data and analytics space was a bit of a organic, kind of slow transition. Started off as kind of an Excel guru, and then through additional management requests, moved over to kind of a larger data emphasis with more technical tools like Alteryx, Power BI, and now introducing Mindbridge into the mix. And currently at Polaris, I lead our internal audit team's data analytics function with a focus on automation and bringing data insights to the team.
Awesome. Thanks, Chris. And for those not familiar with Polaris as a company, who are you? Where do you operate? What markets are you in?
Yeah, so I'll try to just quickly run through Polaris. So we were founded in 1954. It started off primarily as a snowmobile company. Since then, we've grown to be the industry leader in power sports. We have annual sales in 2022 of $8.6 billion, and we have higher target numbers for 2023. We have over 35 unique brands with kind of four main operating divisions. There's our on-road, which is kind of our most notable brands. Those are the ATVs, side-by-sides, snowmobiles. And then a few years back, we kind of shifted into a bit of an on-road focus. If folks are familiar, we launched the three-wheeled Slingshot, which I think is probably one of the coolest products we offer. We also acquired the Indian motorcycle brand. And we also have a few lines of boats and pontoons. And then a big part of our business is the aftermarket parts and accessories. So our internal audit function reports up through the CFO chain of command. And we are a public company, thus subject to SOX audit and compliance regulations.
Awesome. Thanks, Chris. We are here to talk about AI and ICFR, and so as much as I like to talk about snowmobiles for the whole session, we're probably going to be useful for our audience just to set the scene a little bit in terms of the technology landscape that Polaris operate under. And I think this is an important piece because we want to kind of build this session around that technology that you're kind of currently using. So would you be able to kind of give us an overview or context in terms of that technology landscape that's currently in place with Polaris?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think a lot of companies might be in similar situations. Right now, we have quite a vast number of different ERP operating systems. Polaris had gone through, as I noted, a couple different acquisitions and additions to the business. And the business model approach to that was, keep doing what you're doing. We're not going to make you convert to our ERP systems. And over the years, we've kind of learned that in some instances, that's the right approach. And in other areas, kind of looking to consolidate to a smaller subset of ERPs is a stronger approach. So right now we're kind of on a targeted roadmap to consolidate from around 10 to 12 down to 4 or 5 to where it best makes sense. We had historically had on-premise data solutions, so SQL servers, things like that. And in the past few years, we've kind of been slowly shifting over and kind of playing with different data cloud solutions. So right now, our primary cloud provider is Snowflake. And we're in the process now of shifting that on-prem data over to Snowflake and taking a bit of a better, smarter approach in what is the right way to move that data, to curate that data, and have sort of that audit trail visibility into how that data is migrating from our source systems into the cloud. We also have one of my favorite tools that we acquired is called Elation. I hadn't heard of it until we brought it on board, but what that is it's sort of a data cataloging or data indexing tool. So what you can do is you can feed all of the different data streams that you're piping throughout your organization into Elation, and that's sort of what creates that audit trail or that cataloging of your data. And that's super. It almost works as like a Google search for data. So if you're looking for something and you're not quite sure where to go, you can type in table names, keywords, things like that, and it can help pinpoint you to where that data is in your organization. And that is tremendously helpful for anyone in a data analyst type role of sometimes the hardest part of your job is finding the data. And then some of the tools that we utilize now are Alteryx, Power BI, and Data Robot for some of our machine learning, AI, internal house projects. And then obviously Mindbridge as well is one that we've added to the mix as well.
Awesome, thanks, Chris. And I'm definitely going to come back to the data landscape and the data maturity for sure. But just as an initial link to Mindbridge, what were the main drivers for a company like Polaris to embark on such a journey and embark on their AiCFR journey, and when did that journey start?
Yeah, so it kind of started when I joined Polaris. It was a newly created role specific to data and analytics within the internal audit function. And so one of the things that I wanted to kind of do when I was kind of putting my roadmap together of what building out kind of a subset of audit with a data focus or emphasis on it is how can we use data to be better, faster, smarter, more efficient? How can we get insights to the team that we weren't historically able to get at? And one of the other kind of main factors was we knew that our external audit partners had this kind of technology. So the thought being was, what can we do to kind of potentially get ahead of them in some of the things that they're doing, so we can identify the same types of potential issues or things that might be going awry and identify them quicker, and kind of turn it to more of a less of a reactive type approach and more of a proactive type approach in how we seek out and identify areas for improvement across the business.
Awesome. Just as a quick side note, for those that are watching this session live, please feel free to ask any questions of Chris and myself. Can use the attendee hub to ask those questions, and we'll do our best to answer them all in that session. I think there's some polling questions as well that will be coming throughout, but yeah, please feel free to ask a question and we'll kind of answer that. So Chris, back to just a little backtrack there and on the data maturity. you mentioned the technology landscape and the different technology that you're using with respect to multiple ERPs, Elation, and Alteryx. But where would you place Polaris on a data maturity scale at the moment, in reference to building out AiCFR?
Yeah, I think one of the key things when I hear the term data maturity is really defining that. I think there's kind of a broad spectrum of activities that falls within that. One of which that comes to mind is the maturity of the data itself. So if you're migrating data from source systems to data warehouses, data lakes, things like that, how efficient and effective are those activities in getting the curated data to a spot where it's safe and can be trusted by end users, that it is either the equivalent or the curation of the data hasn't altered the data itself. And then there's kind of the other side of the coin is the maturity of how companies and groups and departments are leveraging that data to perform certain use cases or processes. And where I think Polaris is today is we've definitely made some major strides. There was a bit of I think when people first embark on, sort of a data maturity type roadmap, there is a bit of a Wild West approach. You're trying to find areas of, key value add, and it's sort of sporadic and across the board. And I think once you're able to get some wins and some learnings from that, you find that you sort of need to go back and review the overall approach. And particularly from an audit perspective, myself is having sort of that that audit trail of the data that's moving. So for anything SOX related or key financial reporting focused, you really need to be able to point to an evidence that as that data is moving along its journey and then being picked up for those end user processes, ensuring that you can say, we know this data is good and this is how we know it. And I think that's a critical aspect of data maturity.
And then therefore, Chris, how much importance would you place on data maturity then on implementing anomaly detection, implementing Mindbridge into your business processes and controls?
I think it's absolutely critical because the old adage I think applies to all sorts of data applications, but you hear the term garbage in, garbage out. Like no matter how good Mindbridge is at performing these sophisticated machine learning and AI algorithms, if you're feeding it bad data, you're going to get either misleading or misguiding results, or they're going to be confusing and you're not able to understand them. So I think the very first step is ensuring that you have solid quality data that's being fed into Mindbridge or any other data-driven practice or use. And I think without that, you're kind of selling yourself quite short of the value that you're able to get out of something like that.
We just had a question come through, Chris. Someone's asked, do they let you have input to change any of your ERP setup as a result? I'm guessing that question is relating to the comment around the multiple ERP systems that you mentioned in that kind of landscape, and then also that kind of data maturity.
Yeah. So I think where it's unique at Polaris is we kind of have all these different operating divisions that kind of ultimately roll up together, but there's a lot of groups that kind of operate independently and have their own specific needs and use cases. And so it's really important for feedback from our teams to roll up through senior leadership, and for senior leadership to be able to assess what are the right moves, where does it make sense to consolidate and come to a uniform data platform or a uniform ERP platform, and where does it make sense where there's enough differences to where, you know, we leave a certain group or a certain function on an existing ERP. And I've really been pleased with our leadership group kind of making this initiative, because the more disparate data sources you have, you know, quite often it's more difficult to leverage data across the entire organization. And for data engineering teams, it's just that many more projects to go out and build unique engineering data pipelines to bring the data of the entire organization to a central kind of warehousing data lake repository. And so I think it's just key to assess what makes the most sense and where. But I do think we have a really good feedback loop from our teams to get up to our leadership to make the right decisions.
Chris, hopefully that's answered it. Keep them coming. Just want to circle back on a comment you mentioned around the Wild West, and I think you were kind of referring there to the initial use of a data lake and a data warehouse, and essentially pockets of the organization perhaps curating data themselves or spinning up their own data warehouse. Could you perhaps go into a little bit more detail around that, and kind of what kind of steps have been taken since then? And you mentioned Elation as well, that's kind of used for cataloging, but just kind of keen to kind of paint that picture to the audience there of what you meant by the kind of Wild West.
Yeah. So I think when I refer to Wild West, it's more of a disparate data model. So let's say you know, the sales group really needs certain key sales data, and they've curated their data to a certain table or schema of data. And someone from marketing says, oh, there's a bunch of sales data over here, I'm just going to go grab that. What you might not know if you haven't looked behind the scenes is they may have intentionally, for the sales team's purposes, have omitted certain things that they don't want included in theirs, whereas marketing, they may need that but not be aware of it. So I think having, you know, kind of unveiling behind the curtains of what's been done, because once data leaves the source system, you kind of lose that this is our source of truth for certain data. And if you don't know if certain things have been filtered out or other data has been enhanced from other data elements, you don't necessarily know for sure if that's the right data for you. And where you get a little bit away from that Wild West type mentality is you have these data engineering teams who are moving that source data not for a specific use case, but the migration of it in its completeness and its entirety to a new place where everyone can then go get it and be comfortable and know this is all of our sales data. And then from there, that sales team would go hit that new sales table, use what they need from it, and then marketing can go to that. So the Wild West was sort of, you know, people looking to find value of it in pockets and not necessarily, you know, thinking big picture holistically from a full corporate enterprise perspective.
So putting my SOX hat on, I've been lucky or unlucky, whichever way you want to put it, lucky enough to have to perform SOX testing at a variety of different industries. And the situation described there of cataloging and having that audit trail with respect to data, how much of it's changed from that kind of Wild West to where it's now? You know, how is it easier to prove that you have SOX compliant data lake or data warehouse. How's that effort kind of shifted? Well, not effort, but how's that changed over the years? I'm assuming it's become a lot easier, but what was it like kind of initially?
Yeah. So initially, what it was is we kind of separated it from data for management reporting. You obviously want that to be correct, but there's not as stringent requirements to evidence that is correct. Where things kind of get a little different from a SOX perspective is, I'm guessing a lot of folks on the call are familiar with IPE requirements, or information produced by an entity. That's sort of the slightly older requirements where you had to show if you're running a report out of a system, or you're using something to perform a month-end reconciliation, or data that's feeding into a journal entry, you have to prove that that's the correct information. And when you start to kind of look at curated data on a larger scale, it really comes down to the evidence that you can show. And I think that's been the key kind of learning point of this, is what is the most effective way to ensure that we have the paper trail to prove out what we're getting, versus historically we would manually, if we were going for just a SOX specific requirement, we would kind of have to go back and manually recreate and tie things out along the path of the journey. Whereas now that's kind of built into the process of the data that we're migrating over. That there's a lot of data to migrate over, and so that's kind of a journey that we're still underway with executing. But I love the direction that we're taking, to where, whether it's management reporting or SOX related, having that audit trail is critically important for end users to be comfortable and confident that the data they're using in their given process will not give them misleading results.
Thanks, Chris. We've had another question through which might be able to answer. Any suggested reading or watching for some of the things that you've taught yourself? I'll ask another question, is and it's linked, but what advice would you give to organizations out there who are perhaps less mature than where Polaris are with respect to data maturity? If you could do it all again with Polaris, what would you do differently? And would there be any things out there that you would watch and teach yourself as well to answer that question?
I think this is something that is surprisingly still fairly new to some areas of the SOX world. When I was kind of going through this the last couple of years, I was trying to go out and reference a lot of the governing bodies, the AiCFRs, all of the accounting regulatory bodies out there. And I think they're still kind of working to develop what sort of this new age audit world is. And so what I would suggest is, I do a ton of networking on LinkedIn, and there's a lot of companies and folks that are going down a similar path. And I've really just reached out on LinkedIn. If I see someone at a conference like myself, I will ping them and say, hey, I'd love to pick your brain on this. And that's where a lot of my knowledge has come from, is just chatting through folks who are kind of in this new age of things. And I think the other thing too is to have really good open dialogue and transparency with your external auditors, because they're going to be able to give you some additional guidance on, it's management's responsibility to execute these controls and have them be effective. But you can still get feedback from your external auditors to say, this is our thought, this is what we're thinking gets us comfortable with it. Do you agree? Are there any things that you see we could be missing? So I don't have any resources off the top of my head, books, literature, things like that. But I know a lot of this stuff is still emerging, and I just kind of try to keep my eye out and read up on all of the latest there's a lot of white papers coming out from some of the big accounting firms, the big fours, and some of the more regional sized ones. It's still a pretty emerging topic that's fluid in my opinion. And so I would say that would kind of be a place to start. Definitely networking is a huge benefit that I've found.
Thank you, Chris. I'm sure our external auditors watching will be pleased to hear that as well. And welcome anyone if we have any external auditors on the call, I'm sure we do, just to follow up that with some questions of whether or not yourself have been dealing with customers as equally as inquisitive as Chris and Polaris. Chris, on the data side of things, how important is it then to set objectives? Because we sound like a real good story here of Polaris with respect to their data maturity, but I'm guessing that there's been some not only wins but fails on the way as well. How important would you place setting objectives when we embark on this kind of new data strategy?
Yeah, I think there's a couple different avenues you can go down. I think sort of two ends of the spectrums. You can try to identify some quick wins. So the thing, there's kind of a scale that I look at is the least amount of effort with the most amount of impact, or the most amount of effort with or I think I might have mixed that up a little bit, but quick wins versus most impactful is really what I'm trying to get at. So I think the right approach is a combination of both. Getting quick wins is really key to just showing that there is value out there to be had. And some of these things, right, that's kind of one of the biggest reasons of why we want to go to some of these more technical analytic type processes and procedures, is you want to do more with less. And ideally that takes a bit of time up front to kind of implement and configure, but the end goal for that would be to make it a one-time exercise that you can then reap the benefits of over and over again. And then also look for areas where it might take a little bit more work, but it would have a much more profound impact. And I think that's sort of an example of myself is implementing Mindbridge. Mindbridge has been incredibly helpful in getting things configured and implemented, but that's more of a bit of a mid to long range goal of fully kind of utilizing everything that we can get out of that. But some quick wins examples are, automating. One of my favorite things to do in my role is full population testing. So take any SOX control that you might historically test. You get a sample of 25 items, you test and compare against certain test attributes, and you say pass or fail for each of those attributes. If all of those attributes are something that you can get systematically, you can figure it to say, instead of testing 25 samples, why not test the entire population of 4,000 and know with certainty that either all of your transactions are passing, or maybe you identify a small gap that may or may not ever come up from a sampling approach, and you can go plug that leak in the boat before it becomes a bigger issue down the road. So those are kind of the ways I look at it: is quick wins, most impactful, and just kind of start a running list of all the things that you think that can be improved or you'd like to improve, and just try to pick and choose what the right combination of kind of targeting some of those is.
Really good advice, Chris. With respect to Mindbridge then, and for those in the audience, whereabouts are Polaris on their Mindbridge journey? You mentioned the kind of configuration and implementations happen, but whereabouts are you, and what's the kind of long-term plans there?
Yeah, so we kind of have a couple different angles with our Mindbridge goals. So as I mentioned, I'm on the internal audit team, but we work really closely with our corporate and business unit controllerships. And I think there's really some some solid benefits to gain from both. So from an internal audit perspective, enhancing or increasing the sort of data-driven approach to our scoping perspective. So, what areas do we look at and how frequently and why? A lot of times it's been it's been sort of a dollar threshold. What are our larger operating areas? Those kind of seem to take precedence first, and then less kind of material impactful groups will kind of throw on a 2 or 3 year rolling cadence. What we can kind of do now is we can say these are the specific areas of the business that pose higher risk. We can go in, and instead of doing a little bit of everything at one of our divisions or our subsidiaries, we can say these are the highest areas of risk, and we're going to focus our 100 hours or our 200 hours of this audit budget on doing a deep dive here and really providing that kind of more pinpoint precision of risk mitigation versus kind of that broad stroke of we'll touch a little bit of everything. So that's sort of one of the internal audit applications, is just scoping better and focusing on the right areas. And then on the controllership finance side, what we're finding is we're in the midst of really sort of refining our main GL analysis with Mindbridge. And one of the cool things that we've kind of sort of recently uncovered is sort of this threshold approach of are there certain financial line item accounts where we would like to go in and investigate transactions that exceed a given threshold, or the benefit of Mindbridge is you can take a top down or a bottoms up approach. You can say, okay, here's what Mindbridge is saying is at the top of the list with all of the control points in consideration. You can start to kind of look at some of those, see if there's any themes. Some things we've noticed are our manual recurring month-end journal entries seem to pop a little bit more frequently on the full Mindbridge score assessment. But then you can kind of flip the script a little bit and be more prescriptive and say, I'm specifically interested in these areas with these certain control points. So you can focus in and filter for just 2 or 3 control points and really hone in on an area that you would like to learn more about. And so that's some of the things that we're doing from the controllership standpoint, is focusing in on certain areas while also taking a look at some of the broader analysis that Mindbridge is providing.
Awesome. And just going to kind of discuss kind of a couple of points there. You mentioned the concept of thresholds, and I'm assuming thresholds from a risk percentage or risk score, or the Mindbridge score perspective, versus a dollar threshold. Right. For those in the audience, this is quite a new concept, applying risk thresholds to an internal control, especially relating to financial reporting. How do you envisage kind of the internal control framework evolving? Do you kind of see these thresholds kind of being applied for most controls? And second part of that question is, what's the kind of impact on, as an internal auditor, on testing to that approach?
Yeah, I think where thresholds can really kind of come into play is you have the ability to kind of adjust the way controls are structured, or the control description itself, where historically you would say anything over X dollar amounts gets reviewed and approved, and you can kind of play with the thresholds a little bit to say, instead of it being an X dollar threshold, you can have a risk profile threshold. And what we've seen in some instances is you may find a trend or something that's kind of leading to, a larger percentage of reviews occurring. You can correct that, and then you can kind of see that there's a lot of items falling out of that threshold. And then at that point, you can say, does it make sense to keep that threshold and just monitor for one-off items that end up triggering that threshold? Or do we kind of go for gold and potentially lower that threshold and see if there's any additional items that are then falling into that slightly more accurate threshold or the a tighter threshold number? And so I think it's still very much conceptual of where we can go with this, but I think when we started playing around with this threshold concept, it really opened up a lot of doors of the potential to change how we test and what we look at and what management has to subsequently follow up on and evidence in their controls.
Thank you, Chris. And we spoke a lot about that kind of internal audit and controllership with respect to general ledger. Is there any other analysis types that you're kind of currently exploring with Mindbridge at the moment, or kind of where you'd like to apply that risk scoring technology to?
Yeah. So one of the kind of the areas that we've looked at that we've been excited that Mindbridge has released is sort of this flex analysis. So it allows you to take, different subledgers or different, kind of sub data perspectives and focus in on the risk scoring of just that. So it just so happened to be that we were kicking off a travel and expense or T&E audit within our group. And just chatting with Joe, he had mentioned that there was a T&E specific flex analysis that Mindbridge had been provided. So we're kind of kicking that off right now and just in the early stages of that. But if you can take, historically T&E has very much been audited at a threshold level. Is there a plane ticket over this amount? Was a car booked the last day before the actual rental occurred? Things like that. And when you can take Mindbridge and group things by employees, by departments, and kind of look to see where are there patterns across the business where there's pockets of higher risk, you can go in and kind of investigate from that perspective as opposed to a one-off transaction. Was this threshold triggered? Was this not? And so I'm really excited to see where that goes. And then you can apply the same logic to things like invoice and vendor analysis. And, are there certain pockets or groups of vendors that are posing additional risk that may or may not be, issues, errors, fraud, but just business improvement opportunities to where, it's not something you might have looked at historically, but you can add value to either that business or a function overall. So, and I think, Joe, correct me if I'm wrong, there's always new thoughts and pilots of these flex analysis of where we can leverage the technology that Mindbridge has to go beyond just GL.
Exactly, yeah. Many different subledgers. You've got revenue, vendor invoices, vendor payments, customer invoices, travel and expense, payroll. And then for those that watched our kind of roadmap session yesterday for Edge, Rachel and Robin talked around the future process risk analytics. So joining these subledgers and general ledgers together to get a holistic view over a process. So exciting times indeed. We have a question come in on management reporting. It says, what would you say Polaris does better in report delivery? Were there any significant setbacks? And they're curious to know if Mindbridge played a part in that reporting. Any other comments would be appreciated. Any comments there, Chris, on management reporting?
Yeah, so again, I think management reporting kind of circles back to generally we put that kind of outside of our our SOX bucket, so I don't have a ton of exposure to that. But again, I think it comes back to the data maturity topic that we were talking about. If you want to be sure management is getting the right information in a timely manner, that it's not yesterday's news, having that data pipeline, that data stream be effectively tested when it's being created and kind of validated, I think that is going to lead to the best management reporting. And when you hear, we're a data-driven company or we're a data-driven department, I think that's really what it means. Is not only are you working with data, but is the data and information that you're getting timely and effective? Does it give you that edge over your competition because you're able to get to those insights quicker and faster? So I think from a management reporting standpoint, that's where kind of things open up. Is once you've got kind of your ducks in a row, it just opens the door to so many more opportunities of what can we glean from this data that we now are comfortable with working with, and what advantages can we get from that. So I think from a management reporting perspective, that's the kind of the biggest, best way to get value from your data. And I wouldn't say Mindbridge has yet impacted that, but one of the dashboarding capabilities of Mindbridge, you could consider that management reporting. So we have, well over a dozen different controllerships that roll up to our kind of corporate controllership function. And a way that I kind of envision that is, as they get more comfortable or familiar with Mindbridge, they can have a quick view dashboard at the end of the month or right after close, and they can kind of say, they can go in and they can see, does this align with my expectations? Are there things that are coming up here that I wouldn't expect or seem unusual to me? And then they have the ability to kind of go in and investigate that. And I would say that's sort of one of the biggest learnings that I've personally had with Mindbridge is, you hear about it and you hope like it's just going to pop up these magic gems of like this is an error, this is an issue. But what it really does is it brings things that are unusual from a statistical analysis standpoint, that it's not saying this is right or wrong, but it's saying this might be worthwhile looking into. And I think that's where kind of the exponential value starts to come into play for Mindbridge. Is you have to have that curiosity and that subject matter expertise of the data that's being analyzed. And if you combine those two, the curiosity and the knowledge of it, you can really start to unlock things that you would not have historically been able to look at until it becomes an issue and a problem, and then it's fire drill time. I think many folks can relate to that, is just more of that reactionary approach of, okay, this came to light in an audit or a certain finding. Let's put something in place to correct it. And then I think management always has the question of, what could we have done better to prevent that or find it before it became a larger issue? And that's what we're trying to do with Mindbridge, or find those opportunities that we can fix that are, maybe a little leak before things start to kind of blow up a little bit unexpectedly.
Chris, would you, you mentioned kind of your experiences of using Mindbridge, but I'm keen to kind of understand the feedback that you've received from controllership. And you kind of alluded it to there, saying that you do require that kind of subject matter expertise in order to interpret the results and for management reporting. But could you perhaps kind of expand a little bit on that and almost explain the kind of journey that controllership themselves have gone under in order to get those kind of relevant insights?
Yeah, I think it's been incredibly important to have folks like them at the table in doing this. This initially was kind of brought on, as an idea of, can this benefit audit? Can this benefit our controllership function? Where are the different use cases and where do they lie? I've been at Polaris just for a little over 2.5 years. And so for me, when I see Mindbridge say, this seems unusual, or this is out of the ordinary, to me, I don't necessarily have that subject matter expertise to say whether that's out of place or not. Our kind of senior director, manager over accounting, she instantly is able to say, that is strange, that is unusual, let's look into that. So I think they're really benefiting from the fact of, they didn't have to go through the configuration and the data implementation and getting all the ducks in a row. But now that we have that stuff configured, we can just kind of go in and do that exploration that I was talking about. And so that their kind of feedback and experience is, I love that one thing that Mindbridge kind of pointed out can trickle out to a bunch of different things. And one of the things that they're kind of really looking to benefit from Mindbridge is kind of building out a suite of monitoring activities. So right now, one of the exercises we're going through is, if you remember, I mentioned some of those recurring month-end journal entries that Mindbridge is flagging as high risk. We're going through those and pulling out what are the specific attributes of those transactions that we can use to identify those and potentially set those aside, right? Like, we understand that there are some risk elements to them, but we are very familiar with them. We have other kind of mitigating controls around those entries. What if we set those aside, what else is able to bubble up to the top? And that's one of the things that I'm most interested to see. Is Mindbridge is a very iterative journey, and every time you kind of can add a new wrinkle to your approach, you're just kind of opening more and more doors as to what else can we do with this, what else can we find. And I think that's kind of where our controllership function, our accounting side of the house, is starting to find and see benefit from Mindbridge.
That's a really good point, Chris, you mentioned there on that kind of iterative approach. And I think what you're referring to there was the concept of population tagging, so the ability to kind of put a circle around those types of transactions. What other features and functionality of Mindbridge have helped Polaris on that journey? Or put differently, where do you see Polaris on that AiCFR journey with respect to the kind of those features?
I'm guessing this has probably been touched on in other sessions, but the risk segmentation functionality of Mindbridge, I think, was kind of a game-changing moment for us. So when I first started, a lot of my focus was on the initial dashboard that's looking at everything from a transactional standpoint, which has its time and place and its value. But when you can get down to the entry level detail, and you can kind of slice and dice the data by all sorts of different descriptive factors that you have, by department, by account groupings, by you name it, I think that really allows for you to pinpoint and hone in on certain areas. And again, just back to that exploration type approach, like, I find myself just kind of going down all these different rabbit holes that I wasn't intending to. And that's really sort of the point of Mindbridge, is to run all of the technical machine learning type analysis, and then just present it to you, and it's up to you of what you do with that. So definitely the risk segmentation piece is a major game changer for us.
And then Chris, you mentioned around the rule-based statistical machine learning control points. All of these essentially tests or algorithms that we're running against every single entry and transaction. If Polaris didn't have this technology available, how much effort would it be in order to implement something like this or build it in-house to Polaris, especially in considering where you're at with your data maturity with Polaris?
Yeah. So in full transparency, when we first had Mindbridge come in and kind of demo this stuff out, we had one of our lead data scientists from our IT group come just to kind of preview the demonstration, give kind of their perspective on what the technology looks like, what would the potential of trying to build something like this out in-house, and his specific feedback was the absolute largest benefit of Mindbridge is all of that technical, machine learning, logic, all of that has already been done for you. And not only that, but Mindbridge, their explainable AI, is audited and has third-party kind of confirmation that what their algorithms are doing is exactly what they're saying it is. And that's key, right? Because very few of us have that data science, statistical master's degree background to be able to look at this and say, well, how do I even know that this is doing what it's saying it's doing? Having that third-party audit and assurance in there is massively important. And so the way I look at it is Mindbridge does all of that analysis for you. And then the interface part is what my data science colleague mentioned was that's one of the biggest things is they could do some analysis and give, spit out results into Excel and, have it be kind of a manual piece by piece type approach. But the fact that you have this interface that allows you to hop around, drag and drop, sort through things, it's almost like you're starting on chapter 10 and you had and the most difficult part of the journey is chapters 1 through 9. So that's already done for you. And then you can just start on chapter 10, which is the exploration part. And that's where the value add comes in. I know there's been other companies who have tried to do stuff like this in-house and, they've got small wins here and there, but it's, it could easily be a 1, 2, 3 year journey to put something together like this. And who knows, where Mindbridge is at in 2, 3 years, they may be, so you're just kind of always chasing the rabbit if you try to go down building something out like this yourself.
Chris, that seems like a good a place as any to end this session. I think we've done a good job in answering all the questions that have come through. So thank you everyone for providing those. And thank you, Chris, for your time in this session. I hope you all found it very useful. But thanks everyone.
Absolutely.
Cool. Cheers, guys. Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.